lassies and lads, welcome to another episode of Unfollow Question Everything. We are back with the one and only Colette Fehr. I'm so excited to see your beautiful face, and I'm super excited for this conversation. Like, truly, I was like, we were just laughing before we got on, and we're like, we're working on a Sunday, and we have rules about that, but this conversation needed to be had, and so we're excited to be here. This episode is called, wait for it, drum roll, Am I Overparenting? Colette, am I overparenting? We have questions, don't we? We have 5 questions. Colette has came up with 5 amazing questions for you to ask yourself at home to help you figure out if you are overparenting and maybe some solutions to that, right? Like, we're not here to shame, to judge, any of that. We are here to support and empower you, which is why we've developed questions without all of these episodes. So, what is overparenting?
Yes, so it's a very common phenomenon in these modern times. Overparenting is when you're doing too much. You're too involved in your children's lives. You're not allowing them to experience setbacks, failures, to learn the way children need to learn developmentally. And it is really being, I think that's really it. It's being overly involved. And the problem is that modern parenting has started to push what is really overparenting as the way to parent. And we don't have any research that supports that any of this is the right way to do it. In fact, most of the research and most of what we've learned about our evolutionary history suggests otherwise. And I definitely want to speak to that a little at some point through these questions.
Yeah, I think that I agree, the research piece. I'm thinking right now about that Jonathan Haidt anxious generation, and like, we're definitely missing the mark somewhere, right? Like, there's something we're doing that's creating this anxious generation, and yes, it's social media, and yes, it's these other pieces of, being accessible, but also this is a part of it. And I'm really excited for this conversation because I really think it's super important. And I think that it is, we think about overparenting and we think about our parenting and we're like, am I overparenting? And so I'm just so excited about these questions because I really think they're going to help you, the listener at home, figure out, am I doing this thing? And maybe why you shouldn't, right?
Right. And then also, some even suggestions to pull back and still be a great, involved, healthy parent.
Love it. Okay, so question number 1 is, when my child experiences setbacks, failures, or disagreements with others, do I immediately step in to fix the situation, or do I provide emotional support while allowing them to learn from the experience? That is a big question, Colette. That is a big question to kick us off. But in Colette's style, that feels very right. That feels like exactly what we should be doing to kick off this episode. I love it. It's so important. Tell me about what you're thinking about when you're coming up with this question.
So I think this is something that we all struggle with, especially as moms. And I know I struggled with. So let me just speak to this a little from my personal experience. I did this and I did this the wrong way, because what happens when we're all familiar with the term of helicopter parenting.
Right.
And then we graduated, right? Hovering over your child, micromanaging them, stepping in. And then we graduated from helicopter parenting as a society into more lawnmower parenting, which is the term that's now used. Not only are you hovering and watching and waiting to step in, but that parents are actually plowing through obstacles before children even have an attempt to handle it themselves. So the 2 aspects of this that I think are so key is, 1, that this comes from parental anxiety. So you love your child. This is all good, right? And we suffer and feel anxious often when we see our child suffering. So it is not unnatural to want to step in and bring our adult wisdom and our adult resources to the table to try to fix our kids' problems. So I just want to really emphasize and normalize that the urge to do this comes from a good place. And like I said, I did this a lot. I mean, I remember my daughter being bullied by her group of friends and then ostracized in high school, and it absolutely killed me.
Mm.
Yeah. And at that point, I'd learned to step back a little. But early on, anytime anything went wrong, I was right in there to fix the problem. So the second real reason that we've got to emphasize this and try to do something different is that when we allow our own anxiety to impel us to lawnmower, then we don't give children the chance to develop their own resourcefulness and to learn from mistakes.
Yeah, it's the other day I was taking, most of my listeners are familiar with my family life. It's, the chaos and the fun that I endure on a daily. and we're heading to school, and we leave at 7 a.m. It's early, it's getting everybody in the car and the four of us, but we have fun mornings, and we get to school and one of my kids says, "I forgot my backpack." Now, my motherly instinct and my parental anxiety, as you just so beautifully described it, was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do in this moment? Like, I'm literally in my brain coaching myself through it. And I'm like, yeah, this is not for me to fix. Like, I'm literally going to take
So
away
good.
the lesson from him if I drive home and get his backpack. So, of course, my 11-year-old is freaking out. Oh my God, I'm going to get yelled at. My teacher's going to kill me. I'm going to get in so much trouble. What am I going to do? Please, Mom, I'm begging you, please go back and get my backpack. We still have time. We still have time. And he's on and on and on. And I just turned around very calmly and I say, and I didn't have to go to work, but I told a teeny weeny lie. And I said, I have to go to work, buddy. Like, I don't have time to be able to go home and get your backpack and come back and forth. You're going to have to apologize to your teacher and try to remember to bring it back tomorrow. And that was so hard, Colette. It was so hard to drive away and be like, I know that he's already an anxious kid and that this is creating this thing in him. But we've talked a little bit this in previous episodes. Like, if we take away all of this, then how does he get to experience what he did and then the natural consequences? Like, we're taking away the natural consequences so often from these kids,
Right.
and now they are not able to deal with consequences when they come later in life. And I coach a lot of families, and some of the families have kids who have come back home and they're maybe in their 20s, and the anxiety level in these kids is so high.
Oh yeah.
Just because it's like they don't have the capacity and haven't developed that muscle of dealing with even just situations like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, 20 kids in their 20s compared to years ago, my generation, I'm in my early 50s. The amount of real life skills they have, it's so low. They're like what a 15-year-old used to be, and they're riddled with anxiety. And to your point, I will admit I made the mistake of running back to school because my kid forgot something.
Right.
And, I was also dealing with another factor, which is that parents who are divorced often feel a low level guilt about being divorced that can also cause you to overparent, right? You want to jump through hoops because on some level you feel terrible that your child doesn't have their parents together. And my mother stood on her head and solved a lot of problems for me. So I also learned from what I experienced, but eventually I stopped doing that. And what I hear from clients a lot is that, like, let's say in high school, okay, if your kid forgot their paper and now they're going to get an F, well, now it's a consequence that the parent can't tolerate because we're so obsessed with our children getting into certain schools and overperforming for God knows what ridiculous ego-based reason, that we're afraid to allow our child to fail when it counts. So we want to prevent that consequence for us. And then the deal is the kid doesn't learn the lesson. It's not just the consequence, it's the lesson. Like, your son is going to learn just even by osmosis, oh, I need to do something a little different so I don't forget my backpack. Like maybe I leave it at the door in the mornings. If you run back with that backpack, that whole lesson never clicks in. And then you have a 20-year-old who doesn't know how to keep their life intact. I mean, it's really that related.
And you know what I want to say is, I love your vulnerability in all of these episodes that we do. I just so admire it and I think it's so beautiful. But I think you're such an example as well of when we know better, we do better, right? And
Exactly.
it's like, so again, to those listening at home, you've taken the backpack, you've taken the paper, you've done all of these things. Great. You're just like the other 90% of us parents trying to figure it out, right? Like, so there's no shame here. We're telling you these things and sort of trying to help so that this overparenting doesn't become a manifestation of something much harder when the children are older. And that is what both of us get to see on a daily basis, really, of what it looks like when these things are done over and over and over and over. And that just becomes the norm for the children, where it's like, well, I always have the safety net of mom. And guess what? Guess what child does put their backpack at the door? Guess what child?
Yes, exactly. Right? No, I'm so glad you said that because I didn't learn until I went to graduate school and learned about family systems and psychology. And then I was like, oh shit, I am fucking this up royally. And I think I'm helping my kids, but I'm actually hindering their development and I'm crippling them for later in life. And I had to sit through a lot of my own anxiety to hold back, but it's the best thing I ever did making that shift. And you can make that shift at any time, even in small ways.
Yeah. I think these are, great examples. I think the friend one is a really big one too. When you see your kid in a certain friend situation and it's really tough, sort of, what is that lesson? And, the other day, my kids, they didn't get invited to some birthday party thing. And they were telling me in the car, kind of how upset they were about that. And that, they always invite everybody to their birthday. And they are like those kids that just want everybody at everything. But I also feel like it was a great opportunity to have that conversation, to be like, not everybody wants 30 people at their party. Sometimes people want smaller, intimate things, and that's not about you, and just sort of having those conversations rather than, let me go text said mother and ask if my children could be at the party. Like, I'm not going to do that, even though I know they're going to have to live in the discomfort for a while, because I've seen what that looks like in a 20-year-old now.
Exactly.
I've seen what that looks like in an almost 30-year-old and a 40-year-old. Like, I've seen that anxiety of friendships and different situations because some of this happened when you were younger.
Yeah, and we have to learn to tolerate those things because real life means you don't always win. You're not always invited. People don't like you. That is real life, and we're human, and those things do hurt, but it's okay to experience those feelings and move through them. And we've got to build some resilience and a muscle for that. And it does start young. I mean, I'm not a believer in that everyone gets a participation trophy. I think that is the worst trend and direction that we could possibly go in. Coddling everyone to death. It's not real life.
It's not, and it's making the reality of real life really tough for lots of kids. And I think, it is also, you're talking about us sort of building that muscle in our children, but also, Colette, like building the muscle in ourselves, the muscle in ourselves to be okay with like the discomfort that like my kid is sad right now, my kid is disappointed right now, my kid is upset with me right now. My kid is mad at me because I'm not fixing said situation for them. And if we can build some of that in ourselves, I feel like you said earlier, through osmosis, the kids can get some of that too.
I completely agree. Well said.
All right, lassies and lads. Number 2, do I feel constant need to entertain my child and make them the center of attention? Love this question so much.
Yeah. So me too. And I want to refer to Dr. Darby Saxby, who is a clinical psychologist and professor at USC. And there's a recent New York Times article that she wrote that I think is brilliant and the heart of what we're talking about here with overparenting. She coined a term, mindful underparenting.
Ooh, tell me more.
Yeah. I wish I could take credit for this brilliance. She's so spot on. So, let me just give a little background and context that anthropologically, we've evolved through many years as hunters and gatherers, and evolutionarily, what's optimal for human beings has been a certain type of a certain way of raising children that we're getting away from, that all of the research shows is probably really better for kids. And that is having kids around us, but letting them watch with an idle brain, letting them learn, letting them observe, and not making our lives child-centric. So it used to be that people had, even in more recent times, people had many kids, and the kids were sort of lightly supervised or unsupervised, and they ran around in packs of kids. So they had intergenerational exposure, right? My dad's one of six. His youngest brother is 16 years younger than he is. I grew up running around outdoors like so many people of previous generations and coming home when it got dark and learning through the social and emotional interaction with other children. And so mindful underparenting is a call to go back to the time. Obviously, we don't live in a time necessarily where it's safe to let children out for 12 hours anymore, sadly. But what we can do is allow children to come with us and to participate in our lives as an observer rather than the center of attention. So I used to go with my mom. My mom went to law school when I was 5. And for 3 years, and I remember this well, I was the last kid picked up at school, and I'd have to kind of entertain myself out on the playground by myself and use my imagination while I waited for my mom. Then she'd pick me up and I'd go to some of her law school classes and be bored out of my ever loving mind. And I'd play with, this was in, the late 70s. I'd play with her little Sony blue tape recorder that she'd bring into her lectures. And then I'd wander into the library, and I thought the Xerox machine was so cool. And I'd like photocopy my body parts, like my arm or, put my leg up on it. So my point here is that my mom didn't say, "Oh my God, Colette, what are we going to do with you while I'm in this like law class? This must be so bad for you that you're not the focus of my attention after school." No, she brought me with her. I watched adults listening and learning, and I found a way to entertain myself and kind of flop around and use my imagination and learn from what I saw. So mindful underparenting is like, let's go back to that a little. Bring your kid on errands, go socialize with your friends, and let your kid figure it out and be a little bored.
Oh my gosh. You're speaking my love language. I made the kids yesterday go sofa shopping with me.
Yes, exactly.
And by the way, just so everybody at home knows, yes, they whined about it. Yes, they complained about it. Yes, there was fighting about one kid wanting to sit on the chair that the other kid had already said they wanted to sit on. Yes, yes, and yes. All of that happened, right? Because that's the other part of us talking about building this muscle. It does take time for kids to develop that, not everything is about me. We're going to go, I make my kids go to Costco every week with me, grocery shopping. Every single week they come. And part of that is, one of them cooks dinner once a week and they have to pick the food. But the other part is this is family life. And that's what I'm always saying to them. This well-run machine over here, requires your input. It is not just the job of mom and dad. And so, taking them along to pick a sofa, to go to different stores with you, because a lot of it is now, okay, it's sports and it's their sports and it's their birthday parties and I have, 4 of them in different sports, and I only allow them to do one sport at a time. And still, Colette, I'm out 12 times a week at
I'm
different
sure.
activities with them. And so, yes, on a Saturday when we have some free time, I am going to make you come do some things that you do not like.
That's brilliant. It's so important, and this has become lost, right? Especially when my children were young, because I shared custody of them, I would
Yeah.
sometimes feel as though I had to be riveted to them and their needs every second of the day. And actually, what that can condition is a belief that you're the center of the universe. I mean, it can lead to narcissism and entitlement in later life, because that is not, again, real life. So it's really critical that you let children watch and observe adults, because that's a huge part of developmental learning, seeing what's modeled, and also that we allow children's brains to be bored, because a bored brain is not an idle brain. It's a creative, imaginative brain. So cutting back on the technology, some of it is we don't tolerate, back to the muscle, we don't tolerate hearing our kids whine and fuss. I mean, I am not a patient person. So, and my kids would fight. I have two girls, 2 years and 4 months apart. They both have strong personalities. Even when they were children, they would fight like little wild animals. And I had zero patience for it. So sometimes I would err on the side of what can I do to shut them up?
Mm-hmm.
And that often means putting on a movie. We didn't even have iPhones when my kids were little. They're in their 20s. But now it's so easy to hand a child a device. And then what we're also teaching is that, oh, I need to be entertained all the time. And that's not good for the brain.
No. And you know what I love that you said, by the way, because my entire motivation of this method of parenting, which is exactly what you spoke about, is because I don't want to raise narcissists. Now, we are going to be doing an entire episode on that next, but
Yes, we
narcissists are
are.
not born, they are made, and they are
Yeah.
made in childhood. And it is exactly what you just spoke about, which is I'm special and I'm more special than everybody else and I'm entitled to this. And where is
Exactly.
that made? It is made between the age of 0 and 13. So,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
like if you
Yeah.
want motivation, if you're listening at home and you're like, I got to develop this muscle, Coach Mama Bear and Colette Fehr, I've got to do it. Like, let this be the motivation.
Right.
You do not want to raise a narcissist, and you
No, and
will
yeah.
should you make them the center of the universe all day every day. And I, by the way, I'm super guilty of this when the kids were younger, because obviously Cannon had cancer and then the twins were born at the same time. For 3.5 years, I never had lots of time of us together. So then when I did, the
Sure.
center of the universe was them. And I had
Right.
to unwind so much of that, because I
Right.
started to see these behaviors of like, well, why not this? And they would give me a hard time if I like showed up 3 minutes late to pick them up from school. And why aren't you here? And why aren't you like,
Yep.
I will even give you an example the other day, which I'm dealing with my adoptive daughter, which was I picked up her brothers, I took them for smoothies, and I went back and her practice was finished, right? Her practice for soccer. And she points at me and she said, "You missed all of my sport." In front of everybody. First of all, I'm
Yeah.
like mortified. And
I bet.
I was like, I had no intentions of coming to your entire practice. First of all, my name is Mom. You don't point at me. We're not going to be pointing fingers at me. I don't like the tone of the way you're speaking to me. And I had made no promises to come to your practice, but I did get you a smoothie with your brothers. Right? Like, but it was like,
Yep.
it was her like being like, why am I not, and when you
Yep.
start to see some of those behaviors, these are your little signs of like, oh, let me just retract a little bit here on some of
Yeah.
these, like being constantly on and available and them being entertained by you all the time.
Right, right, exactly. And another point Dr. Darby Saxby makes is that I think is brilliant is she says, one of the benefits of conserving our energy by not being on and tuned in or conditioning our kids to expect that is that when they really need us, then we have the resources and the energy to tune in. So certainly neither of us is advocating, don't give your children attention. It's just give your children focused attention when they need it, spend some quality time, and then allow them also to see you living your life and understand that it doesn't revolve around them. It's just a critical life lesson.
Yeah, it's funny, I obviously, I'm very open about my sobriety on this podcast, and I
Yeah,
go to
which I
regular
love.
sobriety meetings, and, they will sometimes be like, why are you going to that again? Like it's something that's not about them. It's not something
Right.
that they really have like they can't attend those. They're private, they're closed. Thank you, Jesus. Right? Like, like
Right.
there's parts of my life that they can't get access to. And like that's okay, because guess what? I'm also giving them permission so that when they are a parent, that they can feel like that is okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And your child is not going to suffer because you missed a game or a play or an event, or because on Saturday they ran around with you doing errands and didn't get their way. They may fuss about it and be a royal pain in your ass, but they're probably going to be better for it in the long run.
100%. It's kind of like, which pain do you want it now or do you want it later?
Yep.
Because
And
because
yep.
it's one of those, right?
Exactly. And so much of life comes down to that. Often, if we
Yeah.
do the harder thing in the short term, it's better in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about it like working out. If you work out now, you'll be able to tie your shoelaces when you're 80.
Exactly.
All right. Number 3. What
Yes.
challenges from my childhood taught me resilience, and how can I allow my child to develop similar strength?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the ways we can try to get the right balance and more of that mindful underparenting, that healthy parenting and away from overparenting, is looking back on our own childhood. And when did we learn certain lessons? Where did our parents allow us, even at the time, if we wished someone might have rushed in? It's just a great clue. So I already shared about how I got dragged around to law school, and I hated it at the time. And I'm not sure most people would do that today. And I had great parents in so, so many ways. But I think today it would be, oh, let me either give my kid a bunch of devices or get them a babysitter or make sure they have an activity every minute of the day. But I learned to use my imagination and to entertain myself with my own brain. And I learned to be bored. And I learned that every day doesn't revolve around me and what I want to do. And so that's helpful for me to conceptualize, okay, it's okay for me to bring my kids to something that they might not want to go to and let them sit around and figure it out. And, when we talked about friends and stuff, I wanted to share one other example, if I could, just from my own life, that actually helped me pull back from overparenting my girls with their friends. And I swear to you, Melissa, I still think about this memory all the time. It's so weird. It's so vivid. It would be really funny if this girl ended up listening to your podcast episode.
Hope
But
so.
when I was in the first grade, I went to this incredible school. We had a very small class, and there was this girl, Emily, in the class who I was good friends with, but we were getting ready to play Ring Around the Rosie. And Emily thought everybody's hand was like too clammy or too sweaty or too cold. And she was being very fussy. And me, already being the impatient person that I still am, unfortunately, work in progress, I was getting really annoyed that Emily kept like slowing us down. And so after we finally played Ring Around the Rosie, I went around bitching about Emily. Like, I talked behind her back and I was like, Emily is annoying. Don't be friends with her. And I mean, I'm not like I never was involved in anything bullying again. And I wasn't really bullying, but I was sort of spreading a campaign to like not
Mhm.
like Emily because she was a pain in the ass. And of course, within a matter of moments, people had told Emily. I look over and Emily's crying in the corner with my teacher, and everyone's huddled around. And I felt so much shame. And I got called over, and the teacher asked, did you tell everyone to not be friends with Emily? And I was like, whoa, I am so busted. And I had to admit that I had. And the teacher called my mother, and, it was this whole thing.
Mhm.
And my mom said, both of my parents, like, you learned a lesson from this, right? Like, learn a lesson from this. It's not nice to say things like that about people. Like, how would you feel if you were in Emily's shoes? And I remember saying, like, I don't want to go to school tomorrow. I can't go. I was so filled with shame. And my parents were like, you're going to school and you'll be fine. Right. And
Mm.
there was no interference. They didn't call Emily's parents. They didn't let me stay home. I had to go face the music and tolerate the shame and realize that I'd made a mistake and that I hurt someone's feelings and that I wouldn't have liked it if that was done for me. And I never did anything like that again.
If only there was more of that, because I think,
Yes.
hello, like the perfectionism that is rife through all of us, specifically mama bears, right? Like this
Yeah.
perfectionism, like, oh, I can't make a mistake and I have to stay here and stand on my ground and I can't apologize because, like, I have to be right. No, you don't.
No, we make
Of
mistakes.
course, forever, all the
Yeah.
time. I just apologized
Right.
to my kids yesterday, like, I mean,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I did. I went back, I apologized to Emily. I felt like shit inside, I remember feeling really awkward, but we repaired our friendship and life went on. And Emily, wherever you are out there, I hope your life is amazing.
Yes, Emily, we love you.
Yes, thank you for teaching me a valuable
Yeah.
lesson about not being such a little bitch.
Oh my God. I love it. No, isn't that interesting? Yeah, that's amazing. I love that story. I was thinking about when I was reading over these questions in preparation of today, I was thinking about when my dad was a window cleaner and my dad cleaned the windows of like everybody I went to high school with.
Oh my God.
And he used to take me what we used to call collecting, which meant going to each house, knocking the door and asking for £3.50 or £5.50 or whatever the amount was. And I remember, the kids that I would sit aside of in math would open the door and they would go get their mum and they would get the money. And I remember at the time just being like so mad that my dad made me go do this, that I had to see my peers, that I had to collect money from my peers. And I would go to school and those kids would like sing songs about me being the window cleaner's daughter. And it was
Mm,
hard, Colette.
I
But when you
bet.
talk about what it taught me, like to be proud of your parents no matter what, right? Whether
Ah,
you live in government housing or whether you live in a 5,000 or a 10,000 square foot home, like it taught me so much about hard work and being proud of who you are, regardless of whether it fits the mold of what other people are. And like that's my whole
love
life. My
that.
whole life is unfollowing, right? Like that's like
Yeah.
unfollowing what the norm is. And but at that time, it was uncomfortable, it was hard, but my dad knew
Of
what he was
course.
doing. He wanted to keep me humble. He wanted to he
Yes.
he knew I was smart, he knew I was all these other things, but like he was like, "Oh, but you're also going to know that like the way you get to do things is by this work that I do as your dad." And it's a
Exactly.
beautiful lesson that at the time felt really tough. And when you think about when you're asking yourself this question, just want to stop for a minute and talk to the listener. When you are asking this question of yourself, think about some of those things in your childhood, because I think it will also really help push you when you're doing the things for your kids now.
Right. Right. What could I share in my own life and expose my child to that would teach them these lessons? And I think there are such valuable clues and experiences like what you just shared, Melissa. My dad's a dermatologist, and he would also, another thing I did a lot, in addition to going to law school, is that my dad would drive me around. I spent a lot of time with him on the weekends. He had a hobby of flying model airplanes. I'd go to the model airplane field with him and help out, putter around, I'd be there all day by myself, I'm not by myself with my dad, but watching him
Right.
do his thing. And then he would see a lot of patients in nursing homes throughout New York City. And so on our way places, we would have to go by these nursing homes, and they were kind of scary and unpleasant for me as a child. And I'd have to sit out in the middle of the nursing home while he was in seeing patients and just sort of sit there and watch. But it really taught me about life and caring for people. And sometimes I would sit there and end up connecting with someone in a wheelchair, just smiling and waving as I'm kicking my legs, at 6 years old, waiting on my dad. And I
Oh,
never thought about that stage of life. So it was uncomfortable for me in a way, but it also taught me things about the stages of life and connection and caretaking that I didn't even realize I was learning until I look back.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Okay, number 4. Are my actions about my kids' needs, or am I trying to fulfill my own emotional needs and personal expectations? Oh, yes, please. We could do an entire episode on this
On that.
question alone.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
is such a good question, though, in all seriousness. Like,
Yeah.
yes, like asking yourself this question is vital.
Exactly. This is tied to everything we're talking about. And this is a question to ask yourself in the micro moment.
Yes.
When you find yourself trying to suss out, am I too involved? Am I over parenting? Or is this like the right kind of involvement for my child? Just asking yourself, whose needs am I serving?
Mm,
Because the push for your child to go to a certain school or get involved in a certain activity or get invited to a birthday party that they didn't get invited to, from the smallest to the biggest things, is this really about your child's well-being and what they want? Or is it about something that reflects poorly on you, or that your own ego is involved in getting your child to do something or not do
yeah.
something?
It's huge. I think it's
Yeah.
just such a big deal, and it's interesting because I didn't grow up in this country, and so the whole like getting into a particular college is like not a thing in Scotland.
How
You
nice.
base your getting into college essentially on like, I want to go to the best law school, so I wanted to go to University of Edinburgh, right? Like everything was like an
Yeah.
academic question. Like none of it was, I mean, anything compared to what Americans have to do to
Right.
get into college.
Status. And all about
Yeah,
status here a lot of the time.
I mean, it's a minefield, quite frankly, like getting into I mean, there
It
are,
is.
all different types of people to help you like get into college now, like this entire industries. And I think that the college experience can be very beautiful for lots and lots of kids, but it's like what college it should be and how it should be is really like should be a personal choice for the child.
Exactly. I agree. And finding your own way and what works for you and letting your kid be who they are. And I just think it's something, we're human. So we have to just check ourselves. And if
Mhm.
we use an example like we've been talking about, let's say bringing your kids forgotten paper to school, for example. So as you contemplate that, I encourage you, the listener, to contemplate, okay, the cost benefit of this, right? And
Yeah.
why am I doing it? I don't want my kid to get an F. Okay, why? Because then I worry that this will have repercussions that will prevent my child from opportunities. Is that really about your kid, or is that about you? And I mean, the amount of parental anxiety, I don't know what it is like here anymore, but I know in New York City, where I'm originally from, and the suburbs, it is, parents are so stressed out about what kindergarten their child goes to and getting their kid into kindergarten. This is not normal. Like, we have really run amok in what we're worried about.
Yeah. I mean, there's like waiting lists for them now. It's
Yeah, it's
Yeah, my
insane.
sister is in Australia and moving to Dubai, and her daughter is, B2 in December, and she said there was already waiting lists for kindergarten, and she was like, I'm just moving here, like I don't even know what neighborhood I'm going to be living in, like it's so crazy. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, it's definitely a different minefield. So, like, in the moments when these things came up, like you're saying, ask yourself this question sort of in the moment. Like, okay,
Yes.
am I pushing for this thing because I want my kid to go to the University of Georgia or the
Yeah.
University of
Yeah.
Alabama or whatever?
Right. Or because I can't tolerate my own anxiety, or because my ego is invested in my child appearing to be this great kid. We're all
Yeah.
human. Like, no one's a saint. We're all susceptible to some of these thoughts. And not all of it is ego based. We all want our children to thrive. We want the best for our kids. This comes from love. So, this is not a bad thing. It's just checking the urge and also using that lens of what lesson might I be preventing my child from
Mm.
learning if I do step in. I think that's a great check and balance for overparenting.
Yeah, I love that. What am I preventing them from learning if I do this thing?
Yeah,
Right? What am I preventing if I pick up the backpack and take it, if I fill
right,
out the college applications, right? Like,
right.
what am I
Yep.
preventing them from doing? Yeah, I love that. That's so beautiful. Okay, number 5, in what ways can I foster open communication with my child to ensure I'm aware of their emotional and mental well-being without being intrusive or overbearing? I'm going to read that again because that's a long question.
Yeah.
In what ways can I foster open communication with my child to ensure I'm aware of their emotional and mental well being without being intrusive or overbearing?
Yeah. So this is, one thing that's positive about modern times, I think, is that we're more attuned to children's emotions and their emotional needs and the importance of attachment and attached
Yeah.
parenting. So this is a beautiful thing, right? Being there for a child when they need you emotionally. And what that means is they can turn to you, they can share their feelings. If they're developing anxiety, they can talk about it, and you're loving and validating and supportive. So this question is designed to just get you thinking about, I want to be there as somebody my children can come to, but I'm not going to solve all their problems. I want to have an open channel of communication, but I'm not going to jump in and fix everything. It's a really different lane to pick on the highway of parenting, if you will, where you're the resource, but you're not the problem solver of everything they're dealing with. Does that make sense the way I'm describing it?
Yeah, it's making me think about how these conversations with your kids come up at the most random times. And I was
Yeah.
thinking about my kid who we have a golf cart and we go up and we hit balls just up at the top of the street basically. And him and I sneaked away to go hit some balls, and he says, today was a really challenging day, Mom. And I was like, oh, okay. So we're
Mm.
having, you got to get yourself like mentally in that spot
Ready.
of like
Yeah.
what's coming up. And, I guess someone took something he did the wrong way, and he was sort of upset that he would never do that in that way. And it was just like this ability for the most part to just sort of listen, and then like some tiny little feedbacks of like things he might want to do in the future should that happen again, right? Like I like trying to be the parent without being like the parent, just sort of being
Right.
his buddy and chatting it through with him, but also,
Yep.
well, you could see that maybe, her seeing her friend being hurt would be the reason that she would get involved with it, and he was really upset that
Yeah.
someone else got involved and that it wasn't their business. And just that ability to also explain to them the other side of the street and what other people are thinking and doing. Because I
Yep.
think when you're young, you don't really think about the other side of the street or what the other person is thinking or why they're thinking it, and it's just sort of like,
So true.
oh, you might want to like, I wonder why they said that. And just being super curious most of the time.
I agree. And it's beautiful what you're describing because it's really holding space for our kids, giving them some feedback, and like the Unfollow podcast, asking questions,
Yeah.
right? Ask questions that help your kids talk out and talk through potential solutions. And you do have more wisdom than your kids. So you can share your own stories and insights. But this is so different from just going, oh my God, something went wrong. Like, I'm going to fix it right away. So you don't have to be uncomfortable and I don't have to be uncomfortable. And then your kid learns nothing. And, and then the flip side also being the kind of parent that kids can't come to because you're too perfectionistic and you're too judgmental and you don't leave space for them to make mistakes. If you don't believe it's okay for you to make mistakes, it's going to be really hard to teach your kids that it's okay to make mistakes. And that's how we learn. And one thing I think I did really well as a parent is to be a safe emotional place for my children. And I'm sure it helps that I'm a therapist and, this is how I am as a person. I'm very willing to be vulnerable. I talk about everything. I'm an open book. My children have come to me every time there is a crisis. And some of the things I've heard, I'm not going to lie, have really twisted my gut into a notch, stuff around sex or what
Yeah.
friends are doing and, friends doing drugs, friends being in a bad place, like stuff that really scared me at times. But my children, I'm the first phone call and they tell me everything. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, I don't know if I need those details.
I had the
But
exact same relationship with my mom. My mom now, like we joke about it, but I was like, Mom, how did you listen to that from me when I was like 18 years old? And she was like, oh, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. But like, I said, well, you did a really good job of pretending that it was not a
Yep.
nightmare for you and
Yep.
that you weren't like squirming inside of yourself as I was saying the things.
Oh, yeah.
And I
Oh,
do
yeah.
agree that, like, even if you can find one person to be able to do that with, it's like it's so beautiful. And in that conversation, my son was saying, "Well, I think she's going to tell the teacher, and I'm going to get into trouble on Monday." And I said,
Mm,
you may get into trouble, and
right.
if you do, you can say you made a mistake and that wasn't your intention and apologize, and then you just move on.
Right.
Like it wasn't like,
Right.
okay, well, I'm going to go call the teacher and make sure that they know that you didn't mean this and that this was an accident and all of that. And they don't come to me and ask me to do that. But I think that's just sort of like teaching them how to treat me, right? Like, and vice versa,
Exactly.
like what that looks like. But what you're talking about with your daughters, it doesn't just happen by mistake, Colette.
Mm-mm.
It really is developed throughout their childhood, and it comes down to a lot of the time not this over parenting, fixing it for them, but being a listener sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Being a listener, being accepting. And that doesn't mean that, if your child breaks a rule, that there isn't a consequence. But there is a difference between there are consequences, and I'm not going to just endorse everything. I mean, we're still the parent, but you can tell me anything and I will still love you and I will not judge you as a person and I will help guide you and your feelings make sense to me no matter what they are, and you deserve to express them and you deserve to feel them. These are things, if there's anything we can give our children as a gift, it is that validating their emotions and teaching them emotional intelligence, meaning that
Yeah.
emotions are here to guide us and they're normal and they're not all pleasant, but they're all important.
Yeah, when I was writing Unfollow, there was a chapter in there of something that I made and a very big mistake that I made. And I
Mm,
got drunk and I drove my car when I was in my early 20s. And my kids obviously know that I'm sober, but before I published the book, I had to tell them, I made this really big mistake.
mm,
And after it, I ultimately, chose relatively soon after that to not drink alcohol anymore because it wasn't a good choice for me. But just
wow.
showing them, I mean, they were mortified and they couldn't believe it. And they were like, you, mom, like they were like,
Yeah.
they took me down from the pedestal that day. But I feel like it was like the biggest gift to them to say, like, you know, they could see someone who they love and adore who made a really big mistake, and like it didn't define me. Like it doesn't make me a bad person for the rest of my life because I changed my actions. And I teach them that, that you're going to make lots of mistakes, guys. You're going to say things you shouldn't, you're going to do things you shouldn't, and you also have the ability to redeem yourself.
Yes. Oh, I love that you shared that with them. I love that you put it in the book and that you shared that with them. And I'm sure it was so hard to do, but it is such an incredible gift to them that they can see mom is not perfect and isn't on a pedestal. She's amazing and incredible because she's human and she's willing to be real about being human. And she learned from her mistakes and evolved and is open, right? That's all the healthiest stuff of what it is to be a person. So I just think you gave your kids a tremendous gift by
Yeah,
doing
it
that
was not
very hard
easy to
thing.
share that.
No.
I literally deleted, and you'll know you're writing your book, you're finishing up, editing your book and everything right now. But I deleted that chapter many times. I was like,
bet.
nope, I'm not putting it in
bet.
here. I don't know that I can have this conversation with my kids. I don't know that I
Yeah.
can. I know they're going to read it in this book. And if I don't tell them before it, that would be way worse.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I kept it in there. This has been an incredible podcast episode. I've loved it. I
Me
think we
too.
will have to do more on this topic down the line because I think it's really important. And I think it's something that a lot of parents are struggling with because you've
Yeah.
seen all the things that have come out just in the last couple of weeks in the New York Times and, all the different things coming out about parents just being so overwhelmed, and we're in a crisis zone with it. And this is part of it, this
Yep.
social pressure of over parenting. And if I'm not doing that, then, I'm judged by other parent peers
Yep.
or in my community. And ultimately, the kids are losing because of it.
Well said, and so true. And this is something we're all struggling with. So let's support each other and
Yeah.
figure out what's really right for us and our children as much as possible.
Thank you, Colette. You're
Thank
amazing.
you.
I'm so excited to have you here helping us through this. And
Thanks
until
for having
next
me.
episode, join us next episode. We're going to be talking about how to deal with the narcissist in your life. So join us soon.